mission is to preserve, protect, and present the history of the Grand Traverse region. Our activities include programs such as this today, historical tours, archive support, high school scholarship support, and support for local initiatives that preserve our local history. Most recently, we have begun to collect three-dimensional items and will continue to do so until the City of Traverse City organizes the Con Foster collection and resumes its exhibition of those artifacts. We are an all-volunteer organization, and as such, we're governed by a lot of good volunteers. The revenues from membership and donations put on programs and support ones like this today. Today's program is entitled Julius Steinberg, the Bargain Giver, from Peddler to Opera House Proprietor and beyond. Based on Julius Steinberg paper collections here at the Traverse Area District Library's Local History Collection, this presentation investigates the Steinberg family and business over the course of the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. While the legacy of the Steinberg family is largely missing from the built environment of contemporary Front Street in Traverse City, a study of Steinberg's life reveals the historical impact of Julius Steinberg and his family can be found elsewhere. Our presenter today is Zoe Schwartz, who is a historian and library assistant here at the Traverse Area District Library. Please join me in welcoming Zoe.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's awful weather out today, but I'm glad you can make it. I'm so excited to be here. I've been working on this forever. I'll talk about it in a second, but I'm just happy everybody came. So I am Zoe Schwartz. I grew up here in Traverse City. I left for large periods of time to do my my studies in medieval history and Jewish studies. And I began as a Petertil intern at the library in 2023, and I've been working in some capacity for the archive here for the past year. Now as a full-time employee, in the local history collection, I work on processing the collection, digitizing, writing finding aids, and over the past year, I've written 5 articles on the TADL website about assorted topics in history while highlighting what we have in the archive. My own primary purpose is to uncover the histories that are understudied, and that is exactly what led me to this topic I will discuss today. The project about Julius Steinberg has been the catalyst of that ambition, combining my passion for Jewish studies and the work I do in the LHC. In any case, my presentation, I will take you through the life of Steinberg, his origins, his business and personal papers, the Grand Opera House, and the end of the Opera House. Many of these topics are further researched and explained in my article, and I don't touch on every single one of them because it's impossible. So I will share the link at the end so you can see it, as well as sources and illustrations will be at the end. We start our journey off with Judel Szteynberg, the birth name of our Julius Steinberg, born in 1848 in Suwałki, Poland. Through research, I was able to find the names of his siblings through to 1858 in the Jewish Record Index of Poland. This region of Poland is generally well controlled by various empires. But for most of Steinberg's lifetime and the years spent in Suwałki, the region was under Russian rule as determined by the Congress of Vienna in 1815-1816, which created the Congress of Poland or the Kingdom of Poland as part of the Russian Empire. And it was the Russian Empire's policies in the mid-19th century that threatened Jewish life in Poland. Utilizing census information was crucial for this research I'm presenting today, but the census often offers incorrect, confusing, or inconsistent answers to researchers' queries. It appears that there was likely not an easy answer to the question, where were you born, for many immigrants from Eastern Europe? So I've run into, for Steinberg alone, these locations of his birth, all referring to the same place. These are exonymic coronyms, the names of countries used by people that are not native to said country. And I've never stumbled onto so many for one person during my research. This map also gives you a better idea of the geography of the Suwałki region. It's right here. You can see the whole Congress of Poland, and the Russian Empire is on this side. Can you see that? Yes. And Eastern Prussia is on this side. The mid to late 19th century was a time of great migration from Europe to other parts of the world. For Jews in particular, nearly 3 million Jews of the world left their country of origin in the 19th century. With the proximity to the Prussian border, Jews of Suwałki largely emigrated from the Hamburg port. Both Hamburg and Bremen were key ports for these immigrants to the United States. Between 1863 and 1873, approximately 1,400 Jews from the city of Suwałki alone left through the Hamburg port. Amongst them was Judel Steinberg in 1869. So why did so many Jews leave Suwałki during this time? I will offer 3 explanations for this great exodus. These 3 do not cover every motivation, but are thoughtful considerations to understand why a Jewish person might seek new soil in the mid-19th century. Tsar Nicholas I established in 1827 a mandatory conscription of Jews in the Russian Empire. For Poland, however, mandatory military service for Jews was established later in 1843. At age 18, Jewish males could be drafted and forced to endure 25 years of service in the Russian military. Drafts were composed by regional Jewish community leaders who had a specific quota to fill. The military was not a desirable career move. Jews were restricted in many ways, like promotions and also practicing Judaism. The military did not ban Jews from observing Sabbath or other Jewish religious days, but they did not make accommodations for them. Since they were unwilling to fill the quota of Jewish conscripts, the Jewish communal leaders would fill out the conscript lists with orphans or children and young men from poor families. Famine and disease are also strong motivators for emigration. Faced with disease and starvation, leaving for new soil was one solution. Famines befell the Suwałki region in 1847, and then a cholera epidemic occurred in 1868. Then another famine in 1868-1869, which led to a mass migration for the rest of the 19th century. Famines are enough to make people want to leave their homelands, and historically, many famines and plagues throughout history have led to migrations. I saved the third one for last because it is rather exciting, and it is a connection to the Steinberg family. The January Uprising was a rebellion for Polish independence in 1863. This battle between Polish nationalists and the Russian Empire killed between 15,000 and 20,000 individuals. The rebellion was ultimately unsuccessful, due in part to the fact that insurgents just didn't have the same numbers or might as the entire Russian Empire. And as a result, the insurgents were given severe punishments, and Russia imposed an even tighter control on Poland. Its connection to the Steinberg family is only mentioned by Deborah Stalker, Julius Steinberg's granddaughter, who authored multiple articles about her family history. One such legend mentioned by Deborah claims that one of Steinberg's brothers was an active revolutionary that administered in the rebellion. This unnamed brother was supposedly exiled to Siberia, a punishment that was administered to around 40,000 Polish insurgents after the January Uprising. With the information that Steinberg's family, it is unclear which sibling this was, since the younger siblings were probably too young to be a part of this uprising. And so without any supplemental information like name, birth date, we are left with one person's report of a revolutionary that was exiled to Siberia. Oops. Which one led to Judel Steinberg's emigration? Well, famine and disease were affecting the region, and those dates coincide with Judel Steinberg's date of departure. It is possible that the famine also affected him and his family some way, but contemporary sources and his family history agrees on Judel's main cause for migration, military conscription. In the year of his departure from Poland, Judel had just turned 20. He must have felt that the threat of conscription was too great a threat for his future. It is unclear whether he dodged the draft before he was conscripted or after he was conscripted, and that I do not think we will ever really know, but many young men fled Poland in the Russian Empire at this time for the exact same reason. Without means of transport, the motives of emigrating would be a moot point. The invention of steam power and subsequently steamships were likely partially responsible for the high number of emigres from Europe to the United States in the second half of the 19th century. Voyages across the Atlantic were no longer a 2-month affair. Steamships reduced that number drastically to around 15 days, about 2 weeks, for a trip from Liverpool to New York. The Hamburg passenger list for the indirect passages on February 2nd, 1869 listed a Judel Steinberg, a merchant from Zuvok, age 20, undeniably our Judel Steinberg. He traveled from Hamburg to Hull and from there to Liverpool, where he boarded the SS Cuba, a part of the Cunard Line, to cross the Atlantic. Starting his journey on February 2nd, he landed in the US in New York on February 24th, 1869. Approximately 22-day journey before he arrived in New York. The Steinberg we talk about today is a person with many names. On the Hamburg passenger list, he was Judel Steinberg. On the New York arrivals passenger list, he was Jodel Steinberg. It's a little hard to see this digitized microfilm, partially due to the handwriting, which was rushed. And since there was another passenger in the indirect list from Hamburg to Liverpool and then Liverpool to New York, he arrived the same day. So I'm fairly certain that this is Julius Steinberg. And his penultimate name would be Judel Steinberg, as written in the advertised letters column in the Grand Traverse Herald in 1870. And lastly, Judel Steinberg landed on the name Julius Steinberg. We can only guess why he changed his first name in the US. Maybe it was less foreign sounding. For American settlers at the time, the new name was definitely easier pronounced for English speakers, or maybe it was an aesthetic choice. What we know about Steinberg is that he was a peddler for some time before establishing his dry goods store in Traverse City. I go into more detail about peddling and peddling culture in the online article, so I'll just move on to when Steinberg brought his wife Mary and their son Jacob H. Steinberg here from Europe in 1871. They lived together for about 3 years in Chicago as their 2 children, Kate and Alec, were born there. Steinberg probably left his wife and children in Chicago while he went out peddling in northern Michigan. This was a normal practice for Jewish immigrants who peddled. Leave by yourself, meet up with other landsmen, start earning money as an itinerant peddler, have enough money to both bring family across the Atlantic and house them among friends, just to take off again peddling out of the city. While we have record of Steinberg and Traverse City in the area in 1870, definite evidence of Steinberg living and working in Traverse City is evidenced by the opening of his dry goods store in the Front Street house block on Front Street on November 6, 1876. All of the iterations of Steinberg's businesses are found in the advertisements in the Grand Traverse Herald. After opening his store, Steinberg joined up with Julius Levinson, a longtime resident of the Grand Traverse region and fellow Jew from Suwałki, in March 1877. Their partnership ended a few months later, causing Steinberg to move into W.J. Backer's boot and shoe store, where Steinberg outfitted a space for his dry goods business on July 26, 1877. Steinberg eventually left Baker's space and opened a new store in the McManus building. Around this time, he made a partnership with Solomon Goldman, becoming J. Steinberg & Co. Then on April 25th, 1878, Steinberg reopened his store in the building opposite of the Front Street house. Steinberg's business was so successful that he opened another store opposite Winnie and Stevens Grocery, one door east of the engine house on May 8th, 1879. It is in this branch store that Steinberg remained and was outfitted into the Grand Opera House. Soon after, Steinberg & Co. had to close one of the stores, moving everything into the store across from Winnie and Stevens Grocery in January 1880. Less than 1 year later, the partnership between Goldman dissolved and as a result, Steinberg removed the & Co. from his advertisements. The 1880s marked the beginning of the Julius Steinberg Papers Collection. In June 2024, I began the process of digitizing every single item, all 164 of them, Many papers had multiple pages or information on the reverse side, so the actual number of scans is probably around 230. After finding these papers in the LHC, I realized how unique and valuable they are for Traverse City history. Digitizing is a laborious process that involves more than just scanning documents or photographs. But having the Julius Steinberg papers digitized meant I no longer needed to access the fragile documents physically, and the transcription I created made keywords searchable and the contents of the handwritten correspondences accessible. The collection consists primarily of business correspondences and construction-related documents. Almost all are handwritten, and the correspondence that Steinberg received were all completed letters. The rest, however, whether penned by Steinberg, his employees, or family, were written on Steinberg letterhead or scraps of paper. They are often fragmentary and resemble drafts with words crossed out, incorrect spellings, and they sometimes lack a signature or date. The other bulk of material are financial documents, receipts, invoices, and personal correspondences. Receipts and invoices are from local and recognizable businesses, as well as other businesses from Chicago and New York. Amongst the handful of personal correspondences is a total of 3 items written in Yiddish. Of the 164 items, I have chosen to highlight 3 that illustrate some of the found condition of these items. Dated October 30th, 1891, we have J.W. Markham's invoice for Julius Steinberg. The letter tells us that Markham manufactured common and repressed brick, and his business was located 3 miles north of Traverse City on the west side of the bay. My guess is that this invoice records the number of bricks and the price, and they were listed chronologically. Markham's statement is one of the worst conditions in the entire collection. It is folded, missing pieces, it's torn, and this bottom part here is totally illegible. The black is caused by surface dust or dirt, and we can also see tears in this section of the document. The bottom is folded and probably will be for some time before some conservation work can be done to try to unfold it, as the paper is too brittle as is to be unfolded. We can also see a little foxing here on the right side of the document, and those light red and purple colors I will discuss shortly. This is the 3rd page from a 3-page correspondence to Steinberg, presumably from J.C. Goss & Co. I say presumably because the lower right corner has been completely ripped off. Thus, we are unable to read this signature. I have transcribed most of the correspondences in this collection, and because of this damage, my transcription looks like this, mirroring the original document as much as possible to keep the authenticity of the original intact. Many documents that are transcribed are fragments of correspondences, as they are missing pages or have torn pages like this one. We can also observe the water damage on the left side of the page, featuring the signature of water damage, the tide mark, that is the edge around the water stain. This last one I would like to highlight are 2 correspondences from W.G. Robinson, Steinberg's architect for the Grand Opera House, dated March 4th and October 19th, 1891. On these documents, we see a variety of damages and deterioration of the paper. I'd like to point your attention to these light reddish spots. Does anybody know what they are? Yeah. These spots or speckles are called foxing, and they're caused by a variety of factors like metal particles in the paper, such as iron or copper, and which led to corrosion in the paper, but it could also be dead mold or mildew that make these markings, as well as dirt, dust, acidification of the paper, and high humidity. This is what happens to items that are exposed to high humidity over time. The archive is climate controlled, so both temperature and humidity are at levels that reduce chemical actions in the paper and reduce risk of mold growth. To keep the foxing from spreading, we have to interweave lignin-free, acid-free paper between the documents that are affected with foxing and the rest so that they do not face the same fate. The exact provenance of the entire collection is unknown, but the bulk of the items likely came from Jack Bensley, and they are supposedly rescued from rubble after a fire on Front Street, the most obvious fire being the Elks Club fire in 1963. Besides that, we have lots of questions about the items based on the condition they are in. Where were they during the Elks Club fire? A suitcase? A closet? In a desk or filing cabinet? I don't know, but I suspect that many of the stains and problems associated with them are related to that fire and subsequent treatment of the documents. Let us remember as well that digitization is not preservation, and making digital copies captures one moment in an item's life, and it does not replace the original. In this case, digitization helps preserve the originals. The less light, air, and contaminants we expose to these documents, the better. So keeping these items in a box that will very rarely be opened is facilitated by the scans I did. Thus, patrons have access to the items in digital form, and seeing the original is no longer necessary. Steinberg continued business in Traverse City for the next few decades, and these two are part of the Julius Steinberg collection. This mysterious hat man haunts me. I do not know where he came from, and I have many questions. Who created it? Is it an advertisement for Steinberg? Is it for the hat display? Is it for another store? Who is this person? Is it from a catalog or a magazine? I would really like to find out one day. Over the course of the 1880s, Steinberg's last few children were born. I will mention them briefly so that names and faces can be recognized, and to highlight some of the portraits we have in the LHC of the Steinberg family. This is Jacob H. Steinberg. In 1888, Jacob entered the business world officially when J. Steinberg and Son opened a dry goods and clothing store in St. Ignace, Michigan. Jacob H. moved to St. Ignace and operated the store there, but he came back to Traverse City in the early 1900s to take over the Steinberg store. The next two children, Kate in 1872 and Alex in 1874, the rest were all born in Michigan. Ella in 1877, Irene, 1879, Bertie Alta in 1882, Rosa in 1882, Leah in 1884, and Leon in 1887. The other two I mentioned just now, Leah and Rosa, I do not have photographs for because they both died in infancy. If you're interested in the politics of child death and family histories or description of Jews in the local newspaper, I write about them and more in my article on the library website. In the Julius Steinberg's collection, there are multiple correspondences to Steinberg from Julius Levinson of Traverse City, asking Steinberg to pay J.G. Holiday and once the Hannah Lay Mercantile Company. While they seem random at first, their contact became clear over time. Julius Steinberg was the first treasurer of the Beth El congregation, just as it was being organized and during the temple construction, which made sense why Julius Levinson, the first elected president of the Hebrew congregation, was asking for payment to the contractor, J.G. Holiday, and providers of construction material, Hannah and Lay Mercantile Company. Beth El still exists today, established in 1885. Today is known as Beth Shalom, and it is the oldest synagogue in continuous use in Michigan. And Steinberg, his son, daughter Kate, and brother Jacob were active members or donors to the foundation of the synagogue in Traverse City. Steinberg continued to be a staunch supporter of the synagogue, and he and Mary contributed money, fundraising energy, and means into the Jewish community and Temple Beth El. Jacob Steinberg was listed as a trustee on the Beth El in 1885, and he was Steinberg's brother. In all likelihood, this Jacob was born as Julius Steinberg in 1857. However, subsequent reports of Jacob's date of birth muddles the water of what we know about Jacob and his connection to Yankel. However, I am fairly certain that Yankel and Jacob were indeed the same person, based on the following information. His children's names and his wife's names are remarkably similar. Enya Rejgoka and Enya Dovira Rejgroska names kind of sound like Hannah. So Enya, Hannah, Enya, Annie, and his maiden name, Rogovsky, is similar to the name of Yankel's wife, last name. Plus Yankel and Enya's 3 children listed in the index have mostly similar names as Jacob and Hannah's first 3 children. Judah and Julius, Lou and Louis. As for Geertz and how they landed on Harry is still a mystery, and indeed the dates of the children's birth do not match up, but I highly doubt it is such a coincidence that the names would overlap to this extent. Another interesting detail about Jacob were the trips he took from Suwałki to Traverse City, and you can see how many times he crosses the Atlantic in order to be at home to conceive his children with Hannah or be in Traverse City. Now, I have a few disclaimers about this that I keep in mind while exploring this topic, and I hope you will as too. The date of birth of Jacob's children based on the 1900 and 1910 censuses, but we know the information about Jacob's children are inconsistent, so these birth dates on the right could be entirely incorrect. 2, we are assuming that all of his children were fathered by Jacob himself, and his wife did not conceive a child with another person, or they were adopted. And 3, we can only really know he was in Traverse City based on the Grand Traverse Herald and one letter from Katie Steinberg in 1886. So with this information and knowing that Jacob did not bring his wife and children over to the US before 1891, Jacob took 3 round trips from Suwałki to US to Traverse City and then back to Suwałki again, and then one final trip from Suwałki to Michigan, where he and his family settled in Detroit. That was a total of 7 transatlantic trips. Who was Ike Newmark? In Julius Steinberg Papers, there are 6 letters that I deemed as personal correspondences. One of the most interesting letters is this one from D. Rosenthal of Kalkaska, dated August 25th, 1886. D. Rosenthal of Kalkaska wrote to Julius Steinberg about a former clerk, Ike Newmark. From the letter that D. Rosenthal, one of, if not the oldest Jewish settler in Kalkaska, and Steinberg were not personally acquainted, but Rosenthal had to reach out anyway to warn Steinberg about Ike Newmark. Ike had worked for Rosenthal from August 6 to August 23, 1886, and was fired for being dishonest. Rosenthal does not detail the crimes exactly, but states the charges against him were numerous, and the penalty would have been from 3 to 5 years imprisonment. But Newmark was allowed to leave and never come back, since he shared the same denomination as Rosenthal. Newmark was on his way to Traverse City, so Rosenthal writes and hopes it gets to Steinberg in time. Turns out it didn't. In fact, it came more than 1 month after Steinberg received a letter from Ike Newmark, sometime before July 13th, 1886. Newmark must have requested to come work for Steinberg, and Steinberg replied, "Not knowing you, I therefore cannot advise you." Steinberg tells Ike to get a recommendation from his previous employer, a William Salson, a friend of Steinberg's. Based on Rosenthal's letter, Steinberg dodged a bullet here. There is not much else on this fellow, and not knowing where he was born, where he lived, or anything about him that may place him somewhere in the 1890s or early 1900s, we're sort of left in the dark about Newmark. So I don't know anything else about him, but I thought the gossip was too good to not mention. Steinberg was a very diligent and successful businessman who helped form a community in Traverse City, and he was generally well liked. Thus, I was shocked to find this article, a long column in the Grand Traverse Herald titled "A Terrible Tragedy," describing a deadly feud between one of our well-known citizens and a disreputable character that led to a bloody stabbing in Steinberg's store on the morning of May 5th, 1887. According to the newspaper, Julius Steinberg was the aggressor and victor of this fight, and his victim, H.I. Price, more formally known as the Big Prophet, was one of Traverse City's oldest residents. The author of the article says, "With all respect for the dying man, it must be admitted that his business relations with a number of our citizens has gained for him hosts of enemies, while his strongest support naturally comes from Mr. Steinberg's competitors in trade." Does anybody get the joke yet? No. Okay, let me continue. Mr. Steinberg's friend claimed for him that H.I. Price was a tool in the hands of Steinberg's competitors, and that the objective was to injure and cripple his business. Naturally, much blood has been engendered, and Mr. Steinberg's detection of another surreptitious attempt to gain an entrance was the signal for a terrible battle in which the Big Prophet was nearly cut in two. Mr. Steinberg's friend claimed for him that H.I. Price was a tool in the hands of Steinberg's competitors. And the article goes on to say that Steinberg was no longer was in no danger of being arrested as long as his friends and patrons supported him. The popular feeling today is that it is to everybody's interest to endorse Mr. Steinberg's action in ridding the community of an obnoxious character, and to fully patronize him, especially as with H.I. Price entirely done for and out of the way. Did Steinberg really fatally stab a business competitor and get away with it? Based on this article alone, you'd think that Traverse City in 1887 was the Wild West, but the fact that Julius Steinberg, who by many accounts was a thoughtful business person, would attempt to murder someone in his own store, it's unbelievable, because it is. At the time, people probably knew it was a joke, but for us outsiders, we may take what we read in the newspaper at face value. We are looking from the outside in, and we have a vague understanding of the culture of the time. We are removed from that environment. Careful reading reveals the entire article was a clever play on words. Steinberg's clothing store cuts high prices, who everybody loves, and his competitor, or work for his competitor, and he slices the big profit in two. So in the end, in the case of Julius Steinberg versus High Price, we find Steinberg only guilty of wordplay. Steinberg announced his plans for the new brick block on Front Street on March 5th, 1891. For the next 3 years, Steinberg was working on completing his Grand Opera House. The year of 1891 was a year of many constructions in Traverse City. Of note is the Perry Hanna residence and a cottage at the asylum, which all began in 1891 and were not completed until 1893. On one known occasion, Steinberg and Hanna purchased cut stone from the same manufacturer around the same time, which resulted in this correspondence to Steinberg, dated September 1st, 1891. Anton Hirth writes that included with Steinberg's order in the train car are some items for Mr. Hanna. This is more than a coincidence. It turns out Steinberg and Hanna employed the same architect, W.G. Robinson, who probably recommended they receive their cut stones from the same contractor in Grand Rapids. Here we also see an arch, the only semblance of a blueprint or architectural sketch of the Grand Opera House that we know of. Probably authored by Robinson, the writing includes instructions on where or how the bricks should be placed for the arch and how many bricks of various sizes were needed. At this point in the presentation, I think we deserve a little trip to the Opera House. So I've included this ticket. I don't think it's still valid. In any case, amongst Julius Steinberg's papers is this piece of ephemera, which is just wonderful. You can see the ticket in the upstairs display case, as well as many other original documents and photographs. The ticket is a good example of types of damage done to original documents, not by high humidity and metals and papers, but from human hands. This ticket was originally taped to a piece of cardstock. The paper and the edge of the ticket were stamped with red ink, and the worst of it was the writing on the ticket itself. Traverse City history. Obvious information. More conservation efforts need to be taken to remove this sort of well-meaning graffiti, but the LHC has already removed the harmful backing to prevent the ticket from the acidic paper underneath or the red ink that could bleed even more onto the item. Since we are role-playing with the ticket, the next step is entering the Opera House. In May of 1893, Steinberg contracted the theater architects Oscar Cobb and Son of Chicago to design the interior of the Opera House. Likely the interior we see here in the photograph from Kate Steinberg and Moses Rosenthal's wedding on June 25th, 1885, is the interior designed by Oscar Cobb and Son. The photograph holds a wealth of information if we look close enough. Ignoring the wedding and the people, there's a lot to learn from this photograph, and I've extracted a few pieces of the background to discuss. First are the box seats. There is a statue/lamp hybrid in this alcove with plants flanking the sides. The statues and design is mirrored on the other side of the stage. You can also see the tips of the chairs and this black curtain. This curtain is in front of all the box seats, probably denoting that this is exclusive seats in the house. Next is one of the main floor boxes. Here the chairs are different and from the ones above, but they are probably also wooden with a more ornate backrest and rounded ears. Lastly, the detail of the wallpaper. And does anyone see another feature in this modern opera house? It's a light bulb. Steinberg's opera house was actually wired for electricity. Moving on to the center of the photograph, the photo gives an excellent view of the stage and the proscenium arch, and a touch of the ceiling. First, the stage, decorated with ferns, palms, and flowers for the wedding. The backdrop has two trees and wings that match with more painted trees and leaves, leading to two columns, giving this wedding a scene, a foreground of Natura Flora focused background. Here is a close-up of the curtain. The curtain is simple, ornate swirls and lines, with the center image, which I cannot make out. Even in the original photograph, the details are totally lost. We can guess it was some kind of painting, an animal, a musical instrument, abstract ornamentation. And now for the fun part. The barely visible mural on the ceiling. It is hard to make out, I know, but maybe you can see, well, what I see is this cherub-looking thing with wings. But I think it's like a cloud, and everybody might see something different. Even harder to see is this depiction behind the cherub, and I can sort of make out some sort of creature, like a deer or horse in the background. Can everybody see it? These are its hooves, and this is its flank. This is a detail noticed late in my preparation for this presentation, and it is a shame that I don't know the rest of the painted ceiling. Although we do know Bert Hall painted the Roman goddess Diana in the proscenium arch either in the spring of 1895, so just before this photograph, or the spring of 1896. If this painting is the bottom part of the mural of Diana, and Diana is also associated with the hunt and wild animals, it would make sense for this deer, for this to be a deer, as Diana is often portrayed with a bow and deer, but it could also be a horse. The interior of the Opera House was changed a few times after the fire of November 1896, which left Steinberg's Opera House windowless with a burnt facade and water damage. In the next month, Steinberg worked on redecorating the interior of the Opera House with the help of the aforementioned Bert Hall. Here is Steinberg's Opera House stage dated around 1905, a decade after the previous photograph. And here you can see the proscenium arch has been changed drastically. Different molding pattern in these overhanging fixtures. And if you look closely, you can see there are also light bulbs. So between 1895 and 1905, new lighting was installed for the stage. The curtain is also very different. The curtain is now adorned with a painted instrument in the center, and the rest do not resemble the 1895 curtain at all. This is probably the asbestos fire curtain that Steinberg put in sometime after April 1904, when he went to Chicago to look at other theaters' curtains, since he wanted to have the best protective and modern curtain he could get. Many details of these photographs, there are many details in these photographs, but alas, a full view of the Opera House and Steinberg's block is not known. Plus, getting a visual for the entire experience of going to Steinberg's Opera House would put us right in the shoes of Traverse City residents of old. The rest of Steinberg's block, the interior of the store, the stairway to the Opera House, the hallways, backstage, bathroom, reception area, the gallery, and the entire ceiling are not shown in the photographs in the LHC. It might be impossible for us to get a good idea of the interior of the Steinberg Opera House. Or is it? The plastering statement offers dimensions, rooms, names of rooms, all the walls that needed to be plastered. If this information was extracted and then rendered and modeled, we might be able to get an idea of the floor plan of Steinberg's Grand Opera House. Steinberg's Grand hosted a variety of events and performances. The Women's Club, in which Ella Steinberg was an active member, had concerts there. The Republican caucus would meet there. Plus, Traverse City High School commencement served exercises or lecture courses, exhibitions, comedies, tragedies, operas, magicians, minstrel shows, which were frequent at both opera houses in the city, and orchestral performances. All appeared in Steinberg's Opera House. Here I've highlighted a few performances. First, Faust from 1903. and more notably, W.S. Hart in The Hunchback in 1896. Hart became a popular silent film actor and appeared in many westerns, and the portrait of Hart is signed and addressed to Manager Steinberg. The year 1903 marks the beginning of the end of Julius Steinberg's mercantile life. It is unknown for how long Steinberg's business was suffering, but in May 1903, the Ferguson Adjustment Company from Chicago arrived in Traverse City. The adjustment firm came to collect the debts due to Steinberg's creditors. The largest debts were said to be in Chicago, by selling Steinberg's assets, i.e., his stock of dry goods. At this point of fiscal crisis, Steinberg announced the end of his mercantile career on November 28, 1903, at which point Steinberg leased his building. The Steinberg Bros, that is, Jacob H. Steinberg and Alex Steinberg, bought out Steinberg's store in December 1903 and began their own store of dry goods, cloaks, and clothing. As successors, they continued the business for over a decade before Alex moved to Detroit and J. H. Steinberg took the helm in the late 1910s. This is a wonderful postcard we found recently in the LHC. Once you start looking for the Steinberg family, they appear everywhere. This is such a wonderful advertising card dated to around 1907, which we had previously dismissed as an simple advertising card. But upon turning it over, I was excited to find another Steinberg family relic in the LHC. Julius Steinberg's end of mercantile business lasted about half a year. He announced he was establishing a wool market in Traverse City, and without a warehouse yet, he would be found at Steinberg Bros store. It is reminiscent to his early years of business, where he would buy rags and metals from others. Steinberg moved to 91 Watson Street in Detroit on December 6, 1906, where he would live until he died. He did not leave Traverse City completely. He often returned to Traverse City during the summers for matters concerning the Opera House and building improvements over the next decade. On December 20th, 1906, Jacob H. Steinberg bought 509 6th Street from J. M. Blakesley. Jacob died on December 1922 here in Traverse City, and Steinberg died not quite a year later in April 1923 at age 75. The end of Steinberg's Grand Opera House is evidenced by a petition from Julius Steinberg concerning the financial situation of the Opera House. In June 1915, Steinberg spoke before the City Commission of Traverse City about the license needed on the Opera House, and Steinberg claimed that the license was too high for the present income of the house. The Lyric Theater was first discussed March 1916, when Steinberg presented an application for a permit to erect a theater building on Front Street. Its grand opening was July 4th, 1916, which is pictured here on the left, with the J. H. Steinberg mobile decked out for the grand opening. This wonderful interior photograph of the Lyric has a little Easter egg for us Steinberg Grand Opera House fans. If you zoom in and look very closely, posted on the wall is the lobby card for Wild Bill Hickok, starring W.S. Hart, a star who appeared multiple times in the Grand Opera House stage in the late 1890s. I should mention that my colleague in the LHC spotted this tiny detail, and then I recognized its connection to the Grand Opera House. The LHC has recently discovered some movie pamphlets from the Lyric Theater. Many include the year and date, and some do not. But further research on these is forthcoming, and they are unique because most of the programs we found are movies that are actually lost or generally unknown. The two earliest films, demonstrated by the Eagle's Eye, are influenced by current events, that is World War I. So think patriotic, featuring German and American spies, German antagonists. Today, the skyline of the north side of Front Street is interrupted by a series of one-story buildings. Surrounded by these historic structures, like the State Theater and other two-story buildings, it is a whole I hope you'll begin to notice after today. Where two other tall buildings stood, and where Steinberg's 3 stories of brick used to be, is nothing but blue sky now. I will leave you with this image from Google Maps, highlighting the absence and the only lasting physical presence of Steinberg that is still on Front Street, the State Theater, which began its tumultuous life as the Lyric Theater, built by Julius Steinberg in 1916. And here are the sources. I know they're difficult to see, but I promise you, most of them are from the local history collection, or you can find them on various newspaper archive websites, and also the illustrations. So, questions? Thank you. Yes.
It continued under different, what, management, different name? What happens to it then?
Well, it still stood there, and I think there were occasionally things that took place in the Opera House, but Steinberg management was pretty much ended after J.H. Steinberg died in 1922. And then the history after that, I stopped looking into. Yes.
How much did it cost from Europe to America when Steinberg first came and when his brother made 7 trips?
I have that written down. I can find, okay, here it is. Nope. So there was one document, we have a ticket of J.H. Steinberg's original trip in 1863, and that was $22, and that was paid for by Julius Steinberg. That was 1863.
Would represent.
It's over 1,000 if you do like the inflation calculator. And around 1,000, I think. And it raised even more during the course of the 19th century. In 1886, it was $34 to go from Europe to Traverse City.
Have money from Europe?
I can't imagine that they did, since Steinberg started off as a peddler with very little means. Other wealthy Jewish immigrants came over and they were able to establish a store or other things like that. But
7 trips. Where was
I have no idea. I wish I knew. We theorized that maybe he worked for some sort of mercantile company and it was part of his job maybe to come back and forth.
Oh,
yeah. Alternatively, he could have really peddled very hard while he was in Traverse City and got a lot of money just to go back and then come back again. Yes.
Can you speak to the 3 bombs that were set off behind the Lyric in 1918 by the KKK?
I cannot. I'm sorry. I wish I knew more about that. I don't.
But that goes to a larger point of, did you uncover anything about anti-Semitism during this period?
I talk about that in my article, but there is one. The Herald wants us to think that it was a very peaceful coexistence, and the first stone that was put for the synagogue was attended by reverends from all sorts of churches in town and various non-Jewish people that came to support them. And I also have, there's the invitation that Julius Levinson put in the newspaper for people to come to the synagogue services. But I did find one instance where Jacob Steinberg, it's really far back there. There it is. Where Jacob Steinberg was attacked by 2 people, and they thought he stole $10 from their house. Turned out he didn't steal $10, but they did assault him and beat him up pretty badly. And when they returned to the house, they found that the $10 was still there. So whether that was violence based on because he was Jewish, was it based on because he was foreign, or was he a peddler? There's lots of anti-peddler narratives as well. So it's hard to say exactly, but as a whole, if you take the sources at face value, it seemed like a very peaceful existence, which I'm sure is not the case. Yes.
So I heard that, I might not be 100% accurate here, but at one point they made some zoning changes in downtown Traverse City, and they were kind of dodgy, and it was about where your entrance could be to your theater, and because his entrance was on the wrong level, that he was like really slowed down in his operation. Like I said, I don't have all the data on that, but I always like wondered if that was like anti-Semitism, the way that they did that to him.
I'll just throw in, there wasn't a zoning ordinance in Traverse City until the 1950s.
And whatever rules
There
about.
was a
when
clear
you-
regulation
Yeah,
rule, where they said that he had to have I know of one where he had to have an exit. And so he bought the building next to him, the Campbell building. And he talked about making that into some sort of entrance into the Opera House. I don't know if he ever did that or not. I think he sold it to the Campbell people and then they made the Campbell building. But that's all I can say about that. I wish I knew more. Yes.
Great presentation. I was just amazed at all the information that
Aw,
you've got.
Thank you.
And if you could share some of the sources, where did you find these things? I mean,
Um,
there's a list, but you know.
yeah,
these
so
areas.
a lot of the information I got from the LHC collection of the Julius Steinberg papers. Other information I picked from Deborah Stalker's family histories, which I did not take as a primary source. I took them as a secondary source. So I took everything that she said with a grain of salt and made sure to check that in other places. And then there's a great book by, let me go to it again. There's some great books about peddling, Jewish peddlers in the United States. Is Hasia R. Diener, Roads Taken, and that has a great history of Jewish peddling experience. Reading that, I found out that Julius Steinberg's experience as a peddler was the quintessential Jewish experience as peddling, because he started off with nothing, and he rose through the ranks, got a wagon, and then he had a store, as well as bringing his family over and then leaving them in the city while he went peddling. And and many also Jewish immigrants who were peddlers became proprietors of entertainment businesses, so movie theaters, grand opera houses, etc. Yes.
Was peddling something done by everyone? Or was it kind of a Jewish profession?
It was very popular among Jewish immigrants because it gave you mobility. You didn't have to work for anybody else. You also had the existing ties with other Jews, especially landsmen, so people that came from your country. And so when you arrived, you went to a place where people you knew were, and they would give you a line of credit for you to buy merchandise and then go sell it. So those business connections that are intrinsic within Jewish culture and community, it makes it very appealing. Plus, peddling is a very, very old profession. Jews in the Middle Ages were itinerant merchants a lot of the time. So peddling is like a form of that as well. Yes.
So I'm the great grandson of Solomon Yalmstein, who came over with Julius, and he was another one of the founders of the temple.
Yeah.
And he was also a peddler.
Yeah.
They would go out and service the timber camps.
Yeah.
And so they were providing a very specific service, and they were able to capitalize on that. Eventually, we settled in Elk Rapids before moving to Traverse City, and they had stores like next door to each other in
Yeah.
Traverse City.
Yes.
So we have some questions online as
Okay.
well. So first question is, we have somebody online who has 2 checks signed by Julius Steinberg as the treasurer of the Hannah Lay Bank, dated in February and March 1885. And they want to know if this is the same Julius Steinberg. The signatures look the same on the documents.
That's really cool. I don't know if it's the same. We have like banknotes that were from the Hannah Lay banking thing, but they were for Julius Steinberg. He didn't sign them. So I haven't seen anything like that, because I haven't seen anything like that. So that would be really cool to look at those and see if that's what it is.
Question about the Steinberg Opera House burning down.
So it's hard because I wasn't alive in the 1970s, and also the newspaper archives are pretty inconsistent about what they report on in the 1870s. So I pretty much stopped my research when Steinberg died, essentially. But I do know that it was damaged during the Elks Club fire, which was next to the Opera House, and in 1963. And we have a photograph, I didn't include it, but we have a photograph of the top story missing above the McClellan's department store. And then when it came down exactly, I don't know. I would love to know. But it seems pretty unclear exactly when that happened.
So we have one other person online who is saying that their grandmother went to work for Julius Steinberg after she graduated high school at the age of 17, and when she got married in 1901, Julius Steinberg, gave them a wicker rocking chair that the person still has in their home.
Oh, wow.
That's really cool. I bet I have a list of all the workers that worked for Steinberg. So it'd be interesting to know the name of that person to see if I have record of that one.
Thanks from people online for
Oh.
your arduous research and terrific talk that you did.
Oh, thank you.
Tremendous amount of work and very clearly presented.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
Sure. When you're looking at his history in Poland,
Yes.
you come across any information on his Jewish faith. Of course, that part of Poland is where a lot of the Hasidic sects began. You've probably read the books of Jacob. The great Polish writer. And I'm just wondering, what was it more likely that people who emigrated here then were, not part of a specific sect? Did you pick up anything at all
So I
on
did
his
think-
faith?
Yeah, I did think a lot about how he practiced Judaism when he came to Traverse City and also as a peddler, which I can talk about in a second. But when they established Beth El, it was an Orthodox congregation, and then it was later transformed to a Reform congregation. So based on the fact that he was heavily involved in it, you would think that probably he was an Orthodox Jew. And alternatively, or he just settled with that, I'm not sure. The information I have about Jews in Poland at this time is for Judel Steinberg is based on the Jewish Records Index of Poland. And that's really just an index of births and everything. So I don't know much else. And I do have questions about when he was peddling. How did he keep kosher? How did he keep kosher? How did he keep kosher? Did he observe the Sabbath? How did he keep his faith while peddling? And I think the answer probably is he stayed with other Jews for those times. And also, it's not unheard of to import meat from various places where they had a ritual slaughterer to get the food. So if he stayed with other Jews, then I think he might be able to get some kosher meat. So thank you. Yes.
Amazed at your tremendous knowledge of this field. And I'm wondering, is this encapsulated so that I could share this event in this movie of this, or see screens going on back here? I'm wondering if it's possible to have a copy of this program I could share with another. It's not living.
Yes.
Okay, so I can answer that question. We are recording this presentation. It will be available on the library's website. Give us a few days. It won't be tomorrow. But it will be on the library's YouTube channel is what you're looking for. And that is linked at the top of the library's website. Yeah, and you can always call the reference desk for assistance in locating that if you need it. The article that Zoe's referred to is linked on the library's website as well on the local history topic page. So the entire text of what Zoe's said and then additional things that Zoe referred to will be on there as well. So there's two options for you.
Yeah, I've written down, these are the two links. The first one is for the Julius Steinberg collection that anybody can go look at online. And then the other one is the website for local history, and you'll find my article and other articles on there. Any other questions? Yes.
There's one more question online. Can you speak a little bit more to what led to Steinberg's big business failures, probably?
I have to, okay, so there's one advertisement in 1892 or 3 where he says he needs $10,000 more to finish the Opera House. Whether this advertisement was kind of exaggerated or if it was true, he literally needed $10,000 more to finish his very expensive Opera House, I don't know. But if you go based on that, then he probably had he put all of his money into the Opera House, is what I would guess, is he put all his money into the Opera House, and the dry goods store was an anchor store, but it didn't pay off over time. Yes.
Julius Steinberg, they were well educated and very confident. Must have had money in where they came from as well. They were very pleased. And also just think about how many languages they knew.
Yeah. So I think most likely his family was involved in the mercantile business, so he probably learned many of the things he knew about peddling and business from his father, like many times. And I can't, and the Devereux Stalker talks about his acquisition of English, and he would say yes please or yes thank you, all sorts of different like things he learned over time. And I think some of the documents that I have show his gradual acquisition of English, and as it improved over time. He's got great grammar at times, but sometimes it's rather clunky, or he spells recommendation with one M. So yeah, I think they were very smart. I think they probably came from a family that were merchants. And as for how wealthy they were, that's a good question. Based on what I know about military conscription of Jews, is that they would not pick people who were of a higher echelon to be in the military. That's not always, but if you had connections, you could probably get around being conscripted into the military. So if you go by that, then maybe Steinberg's family was not up there in terms of socioeconomic status.
Thank you.
We have one last online question.
Okay.
Someone wants to have you talk a little bit more about the role of newspapers in local history research.
Oh, I love that question. Okay, so newspapers are they a primary source? Are they a secondary source? That's a question I ask myself all the time. You don't know if the facts that you're given in the newspaper are accurate or not. But we have so much information based on the newspapers that if we don't believe that they're true, we're at a loss for lots of things. So I always, when I talk about newspapers, I say the Grand Traverse Herald said this, or it said this, because I don't know for sure if that's what happened. I do know that it was reported in the newspaper, and that's kind of how I look at the newspaper. Does that answer the question? Okay, cool. Yes.
I'm just an exciting announcement,
Okay.
but the Temple Bethel,
Yes.
which is now Congregation Beth Shalom, is having its 140th anniversary celebration this August, the weekend of the 23rd. There'll be a lot of activities, but certainly Julius Steinberg and the Yellowstones, et cetera, will be featured, probably with a lot of your information as well.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks.
You'll be seeing promotions.
Okay. Anything else? Yes.
I know your research is mostly focused on the person rather than the culture, but maybe you can answer this anyway.
Yeah.
Was he not concerned about returning over and over again to Poland after like defecting essentially from the military? Was he not worried about like being arrested or anything like that?
That's a really good question. I don't know why Jacob, so this is Julius's brother who went back and forth many times. I don't know why he left Suwałki to begin with, probably because his brother came here. And to return so many times, he must have not felt like the draft was too scary for him to do so. there was the Crimean War at the beginning of the 1860s that caused a lot of that amped up the quotas for Jewish conscripts into the military. And so when he was traveling in 1880, there was probably less demand or higher demand of that. I'm not sure exactly. And I mentioned the Jacob Steinberg going back and forth because it's a mystery to me too. It's the information in the census and what we have on birth and death certificates. They're all different, and it's hard to say where he was at what point. And maybe he didn't travel that many times. Maybe Hannah did come over with him, and that's how they had their children, and then they went back. I'm not sure, but thank you. Is that it? Okay. Thank you.